Hello there ladies and gentlemen, I'm Paul TX141 Walsh, welcoming you to an all new Ace in a Day gameplay for the arcade mode of War Thunder. In today's episode we shall be reviewing the VB.10C-1, a French heavy fighter coming at a tier 4 and a battle rated of 4.0. For the purposes of today's historical overview, we'll be covering the full history of the VB-10 from its inception through to its final days. With that, let's begin. In January of 1937, the French Air Ministry gave Arsenal de l'Aéronautique a contract to develop a twin-engine heavy fighter as built from wood. The design was to be powered by two 690 horsepower Hispano-Suiza 12X V12 liquid-cooled engines as mounted in tandem within the fuselage. The two engines, which sandwiched the cockpit, would drive a pair of contra-rotating coaxial propellers in the nose. This initial design, designated the VG-10, V standing for the engineer Michel Vernis, the G standing for designer Jean Gaultier, was succeeded by the VG-20 design in June of 1937. The VG-20 was near identical, albeit powered by the more powerful 900 horsepower Hispano-Suiza 12Y engines instead. The VG-20 was to be succeeded in January of 1938 by the VB-10, which saw the design converted into an all-metal heavy fighter. Note the VB designation referred to the plane's designers, Michel Vernis and Robert Badie. In general, the VB-10 was a low-wing monoplane with a conventional tail-dragger undercarriage. Its engine arrangement and large size compared to the typical fighter of the time, for example the Hawker Hurricane, is what made it unique. Before the prototype was even built, the French Air Ministry placed a contract for 40 aircraft as of May 1940, due to the incoming German invasion of France. None of these aircraft were completed by the fall of France on the 25th of June 1940, meaning the VB-10's development and subsequent production were to be suspended. Development continued in April of 1942 under the Vichy government, whereby the German Air Ministry, the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, the RLM, had given Arsenal permission to continue their work. Whilst progress was slow, it meant that as France was liberated over the summer of 1944, the French Air Ministry could continue construction of the initial prototype, VB.10-C-1, as of July 1944. Unarmed, the prototype was powered by two 860 horsepower Hispano-Suiza 12Y31 engines. Undergoing its inaugural test flight on the 7th of July 1945, i.e. after the end of the war in Europe, the success of this flight and subsequent tests led to an order for 200 aircraft to be placed on the 22nd of December 1945. A second prototype, VB.10-C-2, soon followed, now featuring a bubble canopy and the armament of four 20mm Hispano-Suiza 404 cannon and six 12.7mm Browning machine guns, all mounted in the wings. The plane was powered by two 1,150 horsepower Hispano-Suiza 12Z engines. Flying for the first time on the 21st of September 1946, the second prototype was plagued with mechanical issues and concerns around engine overheating, as partially seen in the first prototype as well. These issues, plus the availability of relatively cheap Allied aircraft, led to the production order being reduced to 50 aircraft. The first production aircraft, designated VB.10C-1, C1 standing for Chasseur Monoplace, or Single Seat Fighter, as depicted on screen today, underwent its maiden flight on the 3rd of November 1947. It was powered by two 1,150 horsepower Hispano-Suiza 12Z 15/16 engines, and its armament had been reduced to four 20mm Hispano-Suiza 404 cannon, as mounted in the wings. The redacted machine guns were replaced with additional fuel tanks. The VB-10 was to never see major service thanks to the arrival of the jet era and continued issues with the plane, which resulted in the third production aircraft bursting into flames and killing its pilot. Only four VB-10C-1s had been produced when the production order was cancelled as of the 21st of September 1948. And with our historical overview concluded, let us take a look at how the VB-10C-1 handles in the skies of War Thunder Arcade. Today's gameplay is brought to you from the front line map Foothills. For this will be using the following setup. Stealth belts are 20mm cannon, the logic being that these are the belts that are most powerful compared to the others in my experience. Our gun convergence is set to 500 meters. This is because we're going to be embodying an interceptor role, and the 500 meter gun convergence in my opinion works well at bringing down enemy bombers out to a distance of 1 km and enemy fighters out to a distance of 750 meters. As for our fuel load, we're taking the minimum load of 31 minutes to ensure we can make it to the end of the game unscathed on fuel capacity. We begin our analysis then by noting that the climb rate of the VB.10C-1, particularly in short bursts, is very powerful and can surprise many fighters at the battle rating. With our attacker spawn to start with, and adding all the climb rate into this, we'll be one of the first planes to surpass the 5,000 meter altitude barrier, at which point we can put ourselves in a dominant position for intercepting enemy fighters that are climbing at the start of the game or proceeding to go head to head with our friendlies climbing below us. And this is important because the interceptor role for this aircraft implies that we'll need altitude, or at least speed as converted from altitude, in order to be able to attack foes fast and break away just as quickly. And with our firepower in tow, that means we can make short work of anything that crosses our path. And that'll be the mantra we adhere to throughout the course of this gameplay, as you'll go on to see. We start then when F4U-1D Corsair, swinging down on them, we can see that they come out towards our friendly Yakovlev Yak-9U and we'll catch them completely by surprise, cutting their plane apart for our first kill. In now surging back up, we note the Halifax heading off towards the southern side of the map, and we intend to come down them like a ton of bricks. And this is one of the nice things about this plane, it can really start to cut apart the heavy bombers that you'll see at the battle rating, i.e. the Halifax, the B-17, the PE-8, etc. So in coming down on the Halifax, we can see that we build up our speed gradually, and we'll come to dive speed acceleration shortly. But as we get within range, we start to do some damage, and as we get closer and closer, our 20mm cannon will make short work of this heavy bomber, bringing off both of their wings for our second kill. But in this, taking some scratching fire from their machine guns, we notice one of the key weaknesses of this aircraft, and that is its woeful durability. Now typically, the engine, the central engine, is going to take severe damage. Alternatively, the wings will break off of this plane if it's hit with 20mm cannon, in a head-on most notably. If you take engine damage to the point where an engine goes orange, you'll lose 50% of that engine's performance, although it is worth noting you can play and fly this plane home on a single engine. It's not as though when you're stuck on a single engine, your game is completely over, although I would strongly recommend trying to make it home and repair, as having only 50% engine power available with this heavy airframe is going to make life extremely difficult. But having gone for a reload, we're now going to make our way towards the enemy PE-8, who is being guarded by a Messerschmitt 109 F4. But this is where we get to see the power of the VB.10C-1 being demonstrated. Now it's worth noting I'm trying to get as much altitude as possible over my opponent. Now I can do this because the maximum altitude limit for performance on the engines of this plane is 8,000 metres, and for the control surfaces it's 6,000 metres, at which point you'll find that the controls become heavy on this aircraft, to the point they can become unresponsive as you go above 7,000 metres unless you get your starting manoeuvre speed up to 450 km an hour. But as we start to swing down towards the PE-8, we note the Messerschmitt 109 F4 coming onto our left hand side. We're not too worried about this, because in our gradual dive acceleration, which starts off very slow but builds up as we surpass 600 km an hour, it means we can take a swing at this PE-8, get them out the game, and then break up using our superb vertical energy retention to attack this Sterling before the Messerschmitt 109 F4 can even get in range of us with a 20mm cannon. As we bring down the Sterling, picking up another kill, we look behind, and we'll note the Messerschmitt 109 F4 is just not in range to use their 20mm cannon effectively on us, being at approximately 1.17 km at all points. We now go back into a gradual dive, and we can continue to frustrate our pursuer and bait them onto our P61 who's coming in from their rear. And this is one of the admirable things about this plane. With its ability to gradually build up momentum, once it has that momentum, you do not want to relinquish it, because this plane will just soar around the sky, and it can be used as a means of baiting foes to chase you around the map for a very long period of time, and they'll never catch you. And with your maximum dive speed being 965 km an hour, that also works in your favour, being one of the highest at your battle rating. But all this comes at a price in the fact that your short distance dive speed acceleration is poor until you get to that 600 km an hour turning point, as mentioned previously, meaning that when you go to pursue foes, such as that Messerschmitt 109 F4, they'll initially be able to outdive you at the minimum and pull the distance, meaning it'll be difficult for you to catch up. So your focus will be about maintaining speed and using that speed to your advantage, and if you don't have the speed available to you, reacting to your opponents much earlier than you would in a standard single engine fighter. And this is where another difficulty starts to come in that if you do not have the altitude advantage over your foes, you're very vulnerable to threats. Because in terms of turn fighting, the turn fighting capabilities of this plane versus other heavy fighters, which are typically two engines in the wings, i.e. one to each wing, the turn fighting capabilities of this plane are good, in that you can turn fight with the likes of the P-38J, the Messerschmitt 410s, etc. Then going up against single engine fighters that you typically see, such as a Typhoon, a Spitfire F Mark 9, a Messerschmitt 109 F4, these are all planes that are going to outmaneuver you considerably and outturn you at the bare minimum. Although you are able to match the turning circle with the likes of a P-47D Thunderbolt and a Focke-Wulf 190 A4, so you can always keep this in mind, particularly if you play to your landing flaps. although the only thing to note with your landing flaps is that they bleed a considerable amount of energy out of this aircraft, despite the fact that the twin engine combination means that when you go into a turn fight, you maintain a considerable amount of your speed in the first instance, and you can continue to build up speed even after going through successive manoeuvres, simply because you've got the engine power to do so. So use your landing flaps sparingly, and you can turn rather tightly, but I would not recommend using your landing flaps continuously, simply because you will start to bleed all of the energy out of this plane. But no, even after doing a number of manoeuvres down low and a couple of yo-yo manoeuvres attempting to get that Messerschmitt 109 F4 diving through our spawn, we still have enough energy to level out at approximately 280 km an hour at 2,500 meters altitude, and this goes to highlight the brilliant energy retention of this plane. And if you go into a high speed dive, surpass 800 km an hour and then level out, this plane will retain its straight line speed very well, holding it from the 700 km an hour point downwards, meaning that foes who chase you in a straight line after coming out of a dive will have difficulty in being able to hold on to your six. And what's the wonderful thing about this plane as well is that down below 1,000 meters altitude, you maintain your speed incredibly well and continue to build up your speed and hold it just shy of the 600 km an hour mark, compared to a good number of the mono-engined, mono-wing fighters that you'll face, such as the Spitfire F Mark 9, meaning you can simply use your speed to force your foes to pursue you to no avail. But in coming back to manoeuvrability, let's talk about the different control surfaces and their weaknesses. So we'll start with the roll rate, the strongest control surface, i.e. the ailerons. The roll rate of this plane is surprisingly good, and you'd think thanks to its rather large profile compared to your standard fighter that you would anticipate to see at this battle rating, this plane would struggle to roll. Well, the roll rate is good to the point that it actually feels above average, and compared to the typical heavy fighters you are going to see, such as the Messerschmitt 410, the roll rate is superb by comparison, meaning that you can switch up your directionality with ease. Meanwhile, the rudder is heavy and it's rather weak. Your flap turn circle on the rudder is very long and poor, and I would not advise using your rudder to anything other than the occasional hammerhead on the foe who's stalling out underneath you, something we'll see a little bit later possibly. As for your elevator, again it's extremely heavy, but it is reactive compared to your rudder, and the nice thing about the elevator is if you start off a loop at 400 km an hour, you loop to a decent margin, although below this speed you'll find that your loop circle is extremely poor, so you do need speed to be able to loop well. And the reason I'm not employing too many boom and zoom runs, we haven't employed one or two so far to no success, is that the boom and zoom characteristics of this plane are rather poor as well. In that between 600 and 800 km an hour, you'll lose 50% of your roll rate, meaning it's very difficult for you to keep a lock on a foe. Your rudder drops off by 50% between 650 and 800 km an hour, meaning that you lose the precision in your boom and zoom pass. And as for your elevator, between 700 and 900 km an hour, you lose 50% of your elevator's performance, and that means pulling this plane out of a maximum speed dive is very difficult, and I would not advise doing it close to the ground. I do not go below 250 meters, as otherwise you've got a high chance of clipping the scenery. This means that with your boom and zoom capabilities being restricted to ideally below 600 km an hour, boom and zoom is only going to work well over a short distance. This contradicts the nature of this plane to soar with altitude and to soar with speed. So instead, that's why we're not employing boom and zoom too frequently here, and we're only really trying to pick on targets that are flying in straight lines and not aware of us diving down on top of them. Which is why the life of the VB.10C-1 pilot can become a little bit boring, and you're not seeing too much action over the course of the middle point of this gameplay, simply because there's no targets up high for us to strike, or swoop down as they're climbing up. We're looking for bombers primarily, or any climbing fighters who seem to think that the altitude ranges are all their own, rather than worrying about us contesting them. We are looking towards the enemy Sterling, but they're already diving down, but we can see a couple of Yak 3P climbing directly towards us, and here we're going to force them to stall out. Because the stall speed of this plane, thanks to its engine power, is 120 km an hour, much lower than one would anticipate for a heavy fighter perhaps, and that means that you're able to do wonderful things such as this. And you'll note we're actually avoiding using the hammerhead because of the anxiety around the application of the rudder, how heavy and slow it is, instead using our elevator to swing down on top via a split S. We cut the Yak 3P to pieces, picking up another kill, our ace, and now we look down towards the low altitude regions, potentially thinking about picking on another Yak climbing up. As for your stall recovery, the stall recovery of this plane is rather fast. You only need to get to 225 km an hour and the plane will comfortably do so before you can start to use all your control surfaces once again. But do keep in mind, below 250 km an hour, your control surfaces will resemble that of a plane being on a stall, where you'll start to feel your stall effect. You won't be able to respond as well, and your idle speed range is between 450 and 600 km an hour, at which point your control surfaces will be at their maximum, and your ability to build up speed will be at its maximum, as mentioned earlier, particularly in the dive. Now as for your ideal altitude range, well, with your maximum altitude limit being at the minimum at 6,000 metres based on your control surfaces or 8,000 metres based on your engine, which is more important here, or the fact you're focused around your engine's performance, I would recommend an ideal altitude range of anywhere between 3,000 and 7,000 metres. You are a plane that's going to be focused very heavily on bomber interception, or intercepting those who cruise around at high altitude, not suspecting you to be up there as well. Here's another point. We can see with the Yak 7B we've hit them multiple times by a 20mm cannon but picked up no major damage, and that's because we're sparking a little bit. And noting the gun convergence range of 500 metres and our engagement range of approximately 300 metres there, you will experience sparking effect when you shoot at targets well within your convergence distance, such as 300 metres and decreasing, something to be aware of. But outside of that, picking up the assist on the Yak there, this game's about to come to its end, and we've had quite a comfortable game, but one that's been very focused on the interceptor play, a direct role for this aircraft. The game concludes, and now we come on to the post-game stats as always. With our 5 kills and single assist, we're able to pick up 27,157 Silver Lions and 3,306 research points. To defeat the VB.10C-1 in a given matchup then, I can recommend one or two options. The first is to engage this aircraft in a turn fight, particularly below 400 km an hour, where the majority if not all of the mono-engined fighters at the battle rating for this aircraft will gain the upper hand. As in if you have an equivalent turn circle, such as in the case of the Focke 490A4, you will inherit the manoeuvrability advantage due to the smaller nature of your aircraft and the greater manoeuvrability across its control surfaces compared to the VB.10C-1. Keep in mind that this plane starts to hit its stall effects at the 250 km an hour mark. Option number 2, particularly in the case of heavy fighters at the battle rate in this plane, is to go head to head, as those heavy fighters such as the Messerschmitt 410, the Beaufighter Mark 10, and on top of that the P-38J will all have nose-mounted armament which is not convergence reliant, meaning that they have an advantage in the head-to-head versus the wing-mounted cannon of the VB-10. And even if the VB-10 pilot decides to set their cannon out to the maximum convergence of 800 metres, they have to keep in mind their poor durability means they only need to take 1 or 2 20mm cannon shells to the wings to have them come flying off. And with their inability to snap roll rapidly out the way of the incoming fire, it's going to be a very dangerous game for the VB-10 pilot to play in the head-to-head, giving you the advantage, and this also extends to those fighters with nose-mounted cannon armament such as the Messerschmitt 109F4 and the Italian G55. But by avoiding such circumstances today in our own VB.10C-1, hopefully we've demonstrated that this French heavy fighter is rather dangerous when given the opportunity to build up momentum and roam the skies. It's not a case that despite its large appearance it's going to be a cumbersome aircraft. It only becomes cumbersome if not given the space to operate. But with speed, it's lethal, and this goes to show that sometimes appearances can be deceiving. And whilst the VB.10C-1 may be a little bit of an unenjoyable fighter during its stock grind due to how slow and heavy it is to fly, as you get the upgrades, particularly the engine injection, you'll find that this plane becomes a serious threat, and those who underestimate it only do so at their peril. But I've been TX141, and if you have enjoyed this video, why not leave a like, comment or subscribe for future War Thunder videos on my channel. But until next time, as always ladies and gentlemen, take care and good luck in the skies.